Before we begin, we'd like to honor the indigenous ancestors of this land.
The land upon which we stand today is the traditional territory of so many First Nations peoples. And this morning we offer tobacco to elders from those communities and ask their permission that we might speak today.
My name is Valarie Kaur of the Revolutionary Love Project.
And my name is Victor Kazanjian of URI, the United Religions Initiative.
And right now I am 8 months pregnant. And so I could not travel to be with you all today, which is why I'm so grateful that Victor can be here and there with you. Victor has been a thought leader, a thought partner in the movement that we are building to ground our lives and our social justice movements in the ethic of revolutionary love. He has also been a midwife to me as I have been trying to birth these ideas in the world. So the fact that he is here with me now and there with you to continue the conversation brings me so much joy. He'll be there with you right after I deliver my address.
Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you, Victor. Sisters, brothers, and siblings of the world, how are you breathing today? Because right now, as an American, as a Sikh, as a woman of color, and as a pregnant woman, I am having a hard time breathing. I'm having a hard time breathing each morning when I wake to a country where a white nationalist movement has captured large segments of our population and the presidency of the United States. When we must wake each day to face new policies that rip children from their parents at the border, that ban immigrants and refugees from stepping onto U.S. soil because they are Muslim, policies that roll back voting rights and women's rights and health care and the open internet, policies that do nothing to stop the rising seas and coming storms that threaten all of humanity. I'm having a hard time breathing in the face of the latest hate crime against my community, against families like mine, against children who look like mine. Hate crimes that are fueled by a president and lawmakers whose cruelty towards women and people of color is only matched by daily assaults on journalism, the rule of law, and truth itself, all while the lawmakers of that party stand silent. I am having a hard time breathing when even the voices of millions of women rising up, telling survival stories, calling for justice, cannot stop these same lawmakers from handing an alleged abuser a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. A decision that will make the labor for justice for women, for poor people, and people of color in America so much harder, so much longer, and so much more painful, not for the next few years, but for decades to come. I had wanted my daughter to inherit a nation where women are believed. Yes, I am having a hard time breathing. Because what is happening in the United States right now is part of a global trend as we see the rise of far right-wing movements around the world threatening democracy, women's rights, and human rights for all of us. The last time I was having this much trouble breathing was when I was in labor with my first child. I remember my mother whispered in my ear, "You are brave, you are brave," reciting a Sikh prayer of Chardikala, ever-rising spirits, even in darkness, even in the pain of labor. And so every day in the Sikh spirit of Chardikala, I find myself asking the same question. What if? What if this darkness in the world is not the darkness of the tomb? What if it is the darkness of the womb? What if our America is not dead, but a nation still waiting to be born? What if a new world is waiting to be born? What if all of our ancestors who pushed through the fire before us, who survived genocide and slavery, occupation and sexual violence, what if they are standing behind us right now, whispering in our ear, "You are brave, you are brave"? What if this is our time of great transition? The midwife tells us to breathe and then to push. And so I take a breath, and take a breath with me. And when I breathe, I remember that birth is painful. Birth is only possible with pain and with love. Our greatest social justice leaders, from Gandhi to King to Mandela, they built entire nonviolent movements rooted in the ethic of love. I believe it is time to reclaim love as a public ethic in our lives and in our movements, but we cannot do it the same way. It is time to reclaim love through a feminist lens. And when we see love through a feminist lens, love is more than a feeling. Love is a form of sweet labor, fierce, bloody, imperfect, life-giving. It is a human birthright, a kind of labor that all of us are capable of. I believe that revolutionary love is the call of our times. The choice to enter into labor for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves. I have had the honor of working with communities laboring together in the fire, and I want to share with you what I've learned from them, these 3 practices for how to love others, our opponents, and ourselves. Number 1, how do we practice loving others? I call this practice see no stranger. The words of Guru Nanak, the founder of the Sikh faith. He taught us that we can train our eye to see no stranger when we look upon the faces of others with wonder and think to ourselves, sister, brother, sibling, you are a part of me I do not yet know. I choose to wonder about you. I choose to hear your stories and grieve with you and fight with you when you are in harm's way. This is not the golden rule. This is an evolution of the golden rule. Love others as you would have them love you. This is love others as they would have you love them. It requires an orientation of humility and wonder. And so I ask you, whose stories have you not yet heard? Who have you not yet grieved with? What new coalitions are waiting to be built? In what brave new ways does love call you to labor for one another? Because when we listen closely to each other, we realize that love requires more than prayer. Love requires showing up for others at vigils and the marches and at the polls. Love requires rising up together in the thousands and the millions, marching in the streets, flooding halls of power. I have seen you do this here in the United States. I have seen you standing your ground at Standing Rock, occupying Wall Street, making Black Lives Matter, rising up to declare Me Too and Time's Up, starting entire movements in the wake of bloodshed to say never again. And I have seen you behind closed doors, in houses of worship and prayer circles, where you are grieving together, you are organizing together, you are raging together, you are caring for one another. I have never witnessed solidarity this deep in my lifetime before, and each time I see glimpses of a nation, of a world that is longing to be born. A nation that has never been and yet still must be. A world that has never been and still must be. Multiracial, multicultural, multi-faith, and rooted in a revolutionary love. This brings me to number 2. How do we love even our opponents? How do we labor for them too? I call this practice tend the wound. Our opponents, the terrorists, the fanatic, the demagogue in office, they're not monsters, but people who themselves are wounded, who themselves feel threatened, who don't know what else to do with their insecurity but to hurt us, to pull the trigger or cast the vote or pass the policy aimed at us. But if some of us begin to wonder about them, listen even to their stories, we learn that participation in oppression comes at a cost. It cuts them off from their own capacity to love. We begin to see that our opponents are radicalized by cultures and institutions that we ourselves can change. Loving our opponents is therefore not just moral. It is pragmatic. It is strategic. It focuses us not just on removing bad actors from power, but on remaking those institutions of power. This is why I believe it is time to shift the frame of our movements in America and around the globe from resistance to rebirth. Resistance is required for survival, but resistance alone points us to what we are fighting against, not what we are fighting for. Resistance alone marshals the energies of revenge. Rebirth marshals the energies of love. Our goal is more than to stop the next crisis or win the next election. Our goal is to birth a more just world for all of us. And so I ask you, what does it mean for you to labor even for your opponents, to remake the world for all of us? And if this question is too painful to consider, then you must let others do that labor right now. That's why we are a movement. We each have a role, and those who are in harm's way right now must tend to our own safety. And that brings me to number 3. How do we love ourselves? I call this practice breathe and push. Our greatest social justice leaders, from Gandhi to King, they taught us a lot about loving others and our opponents, but not a lot about loving ourselves. You see, this is a feminist intervention. For too long have women and women of color been told to suppress our rage, suppress our grief, and our own wellness in the name of love and forgiveness, but our suffering is not service. Our safety is paramount. We need to honor our rage and our grief and breathe through the fire of our emotions. We need to love our flesh, even inside the labor, and make our own flourishing matter. The midwife, she tells us to breathe and to push when we are pushing into the fires of our bodies or in the fires of the world. We cannot breathe alone. We need to breathe together. So I ask you, how are you breathing today? How are you breathing each day? Who are you breathing with? Are you breathing with the ones you love, with music and meditation and movement and prayer? Are you breathing with the earth, sea, and sky? Are you breathing to summon the ancestors at your back? Are you breathing to create joy in your life? Can you breathe in order to remember all that is beautiful and good and worth fighting for? We need to be breathing, and this brings me to you, sisters and brothers and siblings of the world. You are the faith leaders and indigenous healers. You are the counselors and the artists and the activists. You are the educators and organizers, and that means you are the midwives in this time of great transition, tasked with birthing a new future for all of us. Many of you have at hand thousands of years of stories and scriptures and songs and poetry to help people labor for justice with and through love. Together, I believe we can practice how to see no stranger, how to tend the wound, and how to breathe and push. We need you. For the labor for justice has gone on for centuries before us and will go on after us. But if we return to the labor together now, if we continue this labor in revolutionary love, I believe we can begin to deliver the world we dream for all of our children yet to come. Thank you so much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.